In my 35 years on the bench in Providence, Rhode Island, I believed I'd seen it all. But nothing prepared me for the moment when an elderly woman walked into my courtroom, carrying a burden far heavier than anyone could see. The courtroom had the usual hum, a soft rustling of papers, the shuffle of feet, the nervous energy of everyday cases. But then the sound changed. It became still. It became personal. I remember the morning well. It was a cold Tuesday, a day most would consider ordinary, filled with traffic tickets, expired registrations, and minor violations. But behind each case was a story, and some stories hit harder than others. Inspector Quinn stood as he always did, steadfast and composed, while the clerk called the next case. Then she entered. Mrs. Elena, 78 years old, hunched over with a cane, her steps slow, almost as if the weight of the world pressed against her fragile shoulders. She wore a weathered winter coat, frayed at the cuffs, but meticulously clean. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, a symbol of her quiet, proud resilience. But what struck me the most wasn't her age or appearance, it was the look in her eyes, the fear she couldn't hide. Fear mingled with dignity, the dignity of a woman who refused to beg, even when life had pushed her to the edge. I glanced at her case, a stack of parking tickets, all issued near Providence's medical center, plus an expired registration. It wasn't the usual assortment of violations I saw. I could already sense that there was more to this story. "Good morning, Mrs. Elena," I said, keeping my voice soft, inviting her to speak without the weight of judgment. She looked at me, hesitant. Her hands gripped her cane so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Good morning, Your Honor," she replied, her voice a little shakier than I had expected. I glanced down at the details, 5 parking tickets issued within 2 weeks and an expired vehicle registration. "Can you tell me what happened here?" I asked gently, looking over my glasses. Her voice trembled as she began to speak, but the words seemed to choke her. She swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. The silence in the courtroom felt heavy, and I gave her time. Sometimes the best thing a judge can do is offer silence as a space for honesty. "I've been taking care of my husband, Your Honor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Arthur. We've been married for 54 years. He had a stroke 6 months ago." I nodded, feeling a pang of sympathy. "Is he at the Providence Medical Center?" She looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting mine. "He was. He couldn't speak. He couldn't eat. He was in intensive care for 2 months. I couldn't leave him. I had to be there, holding his hand, feeding him. I couldn't leave him alone. Not even for a minute." Her words hit hard. I could feel the room around me soften. The quiet dignity in her voice spoke volumes, louder than any paper or ticket ever could. "And the parking tickets?" I asked as gently as I could. She hesitated before responding, shame creeping into her voice. "The hospital parking was too expensive. I couldn't afford it on my Social Security check. So I parked in the 2-hour zone, hoping I could get back in time to move the car. But sometimes Arthur would wake up, crying. He needed me." I listened, the weight of her words sinking in. Here was a woman, not breaking the law out of carelessness, but out of necessity, desperation to be there for the one she loved most. Her choices weren't about defying the system, they were about survival. "And the expired registration?" I pressed, my voice still soft. Her head dropped again, and I could see the flush of shame rise in her face. I couldn't afford the registration renewal. It was either that or pay for his medication. I chose Arthur's health. Her words hung in the air. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, each person in the gallery feeling the depth of her sacrifice. I let the silence linger. Sometimes it's not the law that needs to be spoken, it's humanity. "You don't have to apologize, Mrs. Elena. You were doing what any loving wife would do." Tears finally fell from her eyes, and her shoulders began to soften. For the first time, she seemed to breathe a little easier. But as the reality set in, the legal matters remained. The tickets, though understandable, still needed addressing. The law is the law. Emergencies don't erase violations, they explain them. But as I read through the case, I couldn't ignore the human element in front of me. "I'm going to dismiss these 5 parking tickets," I announced, my voice steady. "You were not breaking the law to be defiant. You were doing what was necessary. I will not punish you for your devotion." She gasped, her face a mixture of disbelief and relief. But the registration was still an issue. "The fine for that was $200. a sum that felt like a mountain for someone living on a fixed income. I couldn't let that stand. So I did something that shocked everyone in the room. I pulled out my wallet and placed $200 on the bench. "I'll pay the fine for you," I said, my voice calm but firm. The room went silent. Even the prosecutor, who had been prepared for a different outcome, didn't say a word. This wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what was right. Mrs. Elena didn't have to face one more financial burden. She had already borne more than enough. She covered her face, sobbing openly now. It wasn't the quiet, restrained tears she had shed before. This was the weeping of someone who had finally found relief, the weight of the world lifted, if only for a moment. "I'm doing this because you deserve to breathe," I told her. "You've given so much of yourself. You shouldn't have to choose between your husband's health and your dignity. No one should." When she left the courtroom, it wasn't just the tickets that were gone. She left with her self-worth intact. And that's what justice should always do: protect human dignity. I think of Mrs. Elena often. Her story didn't end with a legal ruling. It became a lesson in mercy, a lesson in recognizing the humanity behind every case that walks into a courtroom. If you believe that no one should ever feel small because of their circumstances, leave a comment below. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it today. And remember, justice isn't about power. It's about mercy, compassion, and doing what's right.